Hello, everybody. My name is Mava. I'm the president of Lane County Audubon Society. We're speaking to you from the University of Oregon. We have people out listening via Zoom, and we have people listening in the room. Not a huge crowd, but a good crowd that I know are anxious to see and hear Noah. We're all very happy to be here tonight and want to welcome each of you for joining us. And we just have a couple of announcements beforehand before Noah begins his talk. So also I want to thank Peg Boulay from the University of Oregon Environmental Studies. She's teaching avian conservation this term. So because of that class, we were able to come to campus to do this presentation tonight. So thank you. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Debbie so she can do a brief conservation announcement.
Welcome, everybody. Before the conservation announcement, I just want to remind those who are listening at home to please keep your devices muted so we don't get feedback through Noah's computer. And also, you might need to raise the volume on your computer or device. For people in the room, I'm just reminding you that Noah is going to be removing his mask. That's the mandate here at the UO is that if everybody is masked in the room and the speaker is at least 6 feet away, then the speaker can unmask. Human behavior is very contagious, so it might be like you see him removing the mask or see him yawn and you want to yawn or remove your mask, but we're asking everybody to please keep your mask on. For the conservation announcement, I just want to remind everybody that, it's migration season. It's so fascinating to say goodbye to some of our summer residents and welcome to some of our winter residents. But I do want to remind you that there are many perils along the way as birds migrate. We can make a difference. One of the biggest causes of bird mortality is banging into windows. Please see our website for how you can prevent window collisions. There's all kinds of simple coverings and tricks you can use on your windows to keep the birds from crashing into them. Unfortunately, birds don't see glass. They see the reflection, so they fly on through and hit pretty hard. The other thing that we can do is lights. Lights disorient birds, brings them out of their migratory pathway, brings them down into town where there's a greater chance they'll collide with buildings. So wherever you can, please close your blinds and curtains and shades and turn off your lights. If you have security lights outside, please make sure they're shielded above and pointed downward. Let's do what we can to help our migratory birds on the way. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pass this over to Dennis.
Thank you, Debbie. This is our first hybrid meeting. We've got people here and we're doing it over Zoom. We hope everything works. So this will be a bit of an experiment. By the way, our next meetings are going to be Zoom only. And I'll tell you a little bit about what's coming up. In November, we have Ram Papish. This will be his 4th program meeting for Lane County Audubon Society. He was going to do a trip to South America, and that got canceled, so he went to Alaska. I'm not sure if that was better, but he has a great adventure to share with us, so that'll be in November. We never know what to expect from Ram, but it's always good. In October, for the first time, we have Gina Roberti. She is the Science Education Coordinator at Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument. She is a bird enthusiast and naturalist, and the eruption in 1980 did a lot to give a variety of habitats for birds, and so she's going to talk about the birds at Mount St. Helens. This should be exciting for me anyway. I want to be able to see what happened up there at that amazing place. So that'll be in October. Tonight, we have someone that's well known to just about everyone. He grew up near Eugene. He's an associate editor of Birding Magazine. He has authored 5 books, including Birding Without Borders, a book about a big year of birding around the world. He recorded an amazing 6,042 species of birds. Pretty amazing. He has guided more than 50 expeditions to Antarctica and the Arctic. He likes to say, spreading the joy of birds from pole to pole. He is also an amazing hiker. 10 years ago, he hiked the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada, 2,665 miles, averaging 22 miles per day. He recently achieved a master's degree in marine sciences from Stony Brook University, that powerful football university we all know about. Tonight's program is a direct result from his degree program's research. So please give a grand welcome to Noah.
Oh my gosh, Stony Brook football. I was rooting for both sides. So, wow, this is great. I have faces all over in front of me. We have, looks like many more people virtually. So I'm gonna make sure the camera has got my best side here. And can you all hear me up in the nosebleeds as well? Great. Well, it's good to be back at Lane County Audubon. You know, it's been a bit of a break, shall we say, since the last in-person programs happened. For me, it's been something of a break even this summer. I would be working in Arctic Russia right now, guiding on a cruise ship full of passengers looking for polar bears, but seems like no one wants to get on a cruise ship for some reason right now. So here we are. It's actually been kind of nice to be here for a change in the summer. I haven't spent a summer locally in Oregon for a few years. So this was just a couple weeks ago at the summit of Steens Mountain in Southeast Oregon, looking for black rosy finches, a specialty bird of Steens Mountain up there. But right now here tonight, just for the next 45 minutes or so, I would like you all to cast your minds back to the before times, before anyone was ever even talking about anything like a pandemic. And by pandemic, of course, I'm talking about the great pandemic of 1918. And in a couple of years before that, this gentleman was doing some exploring around the southern end of the world. We'll get to him in a minute. And then we're going to throw in some cute baby penguin photos and a little bit of science here and there. And we might have a celebrity cameo or two as well in this talk. And then we're going to talk about whatever is happening in this photo toward the end. But to kick things off, I just want to get us situated physically. So this rock sticking out of the ocean, surrounded and covered by ice, is called Elephant Island. And I wanted to show you where Elephant Island is on a map. So I got the first world map I could find. Well, that's awkward because this map doesn't actually have Elephant Island on it. This is one of my major pet peeves with world maps, is so many of them leave off a major continent. So that one's not going to work. Let's find a new map that actually has Antarctica on it. Elephant Island is right there. So that's right at the tip of what's called the Antarctic Peninsula, sticking up just down there south of South America. And if you zoom in on that region of the world, again, just to get us situated here, we've got Chile there and Argentina, southern end of South America. There's a couple of other islands around, the Falklands and South Georgia Island, which is another incredible part of the world. I'm not going to talk about it anymore because that's a whole different story. And the Antarctic Peninsula coming up from the south. And Elephant Island on this map is that little tiny speck of snow and rock sitting right off the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. So it's kind of a tough part of the world to get to, as you might imagine. The closest commercial airport is up there in a city called Ushuaia at the very southern tip of Argentina. You fly into Ushuaia, get on a ship, and then go across 550 miles of the stormiest, most windswept ocean anywhere in the world. And this is famously called the Drake Passage. So I've been across the Drake Passage many times. In fact, I was just calculating the other day, I've spent about 2 months of my life just floating around in the Drake Passage itself at this point. And I've seen a lot of people, they'll go down and they see the name Drake Passage and they think, oh, that sounds pretty intimidating. So the first thing they do is they go and they look it up on YouTube. Well, I'll show you what you find if you type Drake Passage into YouTube. So here's a nice little cruise ship. This one is, it's called the Corinthian these days. Anyway, it takes about 100 passengers. Here it is floating around, probably up in the Mediterranean, somewhere nice. And then every now and then this ship ventures down across the Drake Passage to Antarctica. And in January of 2010, it famously encountered a bit of a storm. So this is some news footage taken from another ship that came to help out after the Corinthians' bridge windows were blown out by a large wave and the water came through, shorted out most of its electronics, including all of its communication equipment and one of its engines. So the people on this ship that's filming this footage, that very nice man right there, has got a satellite phone wrapped up on a rope that he's gonna fling over to the deck of this other poor cruise ship so that they can call out and address the situation. Don't worry, it all worked out just fine. They had to go really slow because they only had one engine left, but they eventually made it back to port after 2.5 more days of riding this storm out. So that is what the Drake Passage can be like sometimes. We like to call that the Drake Shake. But to be honest, more often it looks more like this. This is what you don't see on the alternate universe of YouTube. And this is what we like to call the Drake Lake when it's much more calm. So on a more typical Drake Passage crossing, you'll spend about 2 days going south from Ushuaia, Argentina, and then if you head the right direction, the very first land you'll see popping up on the horizon on a nice day like this is the peaks of Elephant Island. So here's what that island looks like from a satellite view. 29 miles wide by 17 miles. It's 3,000 feet tall on its highest mountains. All right, but why do you think this island is called Elephant Island? I mean, it's nowhere near Africa or anywhere else there's elephants. Any ideas? Well, yeah, okay. So it kind of, if you squint a little bit, it kind of looks like an elephant head, doesn't it? This is a popular idea for why it's called Elephant Island. However, I think if you go back to when the first explorers were going down to these parts of the world, they were probably a bit more concerned with all of the elephant seals that are thronging the beaches, which were extremely valuable back then because of their blubber. So maybe that's why it's called Elephant Island. Personally, I like to think that it's named that because it is literally one L of an island. And this is actually a direct quote from that gentleman I showed you earlier. And his name, of course, is Ernest Shackleton. Shackleton probably made this rock of an island in Antarctica more famous than anyone else has in history. And to tell you why, I just need to give you a synopsis in a nutshell of Shackleton's adventures down there. So bear with me for just a second as we zoom back out. Let's get reoriented here. So this is the entire continent of Antarctica with the South Pole in the middle. You've got a couple of seas that bite big chunks out of opposite sides of it, and then the peninsula sticking up there to the upper left on this map towards South America. So in the early 1900s, there was a big race among several different explorers to see who could be the first one to set foot on the South Pole itself. And Shackleton was part of a couple of these adventures. And in 1909, his party got closer to the South Pole than anyone else ever had before, within 97 miles of the pole itself. That, for reference on this map, is about where the very tip of that green arrow is. That's like getting within 100 feet of the summit of Mount Everest and then turning around because you realize you don't have enough supplies quite to make it all the way. So he almost made it, and then he came back. Well, 2 years later, 2 other explorers named Amundsen and Scott mounted their own independent South Pole expeditions, and both of those guys made it to the pole. Anyway, Scott tragically, famously died on the way back home. But in any case, the pole had been reached at this point. So it was conquered, end of story, you would think. But Shackleton must have been a bit miffed at that because he had come so close to the pole 2 years before and then didn't really get any of the glory of reaching it. So he said, well, not quite. Okay, so the next big adventure is not just to go to the South Pole, but to cross the entire continent of Antarctica from one side to the other. Let's see who can be the first one to do that. So he set out to do that just a couple years later, following more or less this route from the Weddell to the Ross Sea on the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, which was all well and good, except it never got off the ground, literally, because when they sailed down into the Weddell Sea to start this massive journey, right about where the red X is, their ship sailed into the sea ice and it was stuck. And they couldn't even reach land to get started. Fortunately for us, they had an amazing photographer on this expedition who was taking photos on huge glass plates. That's what these are from. And so we can see exactly what happened next. Their ship got stuck. The guys got out and they tried to dig it out by hand, but that was pretty futile because it was just blocked in to the sea ice at that point. And then winter came and it got dark 24 hours a day. And they spent the entire winter sitting on their ship, stuck in the ice, waiting for spring to break them out, hopefully. But unfortunately, when spring came around, a big chunk of ice rammed the side of the ship and it was crushed and it sank underneath the ice. And all the guys were stranded at this point on the sea ice itself. And then they realized, we're not going to do the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. We just need to try to get home because they were thousands of miles away from civilization. So they took to their lifeboats that they'd salvaged from the ship before it sank. They hauled these lifeboats across the sea ice, which looks extremely strenuous. The sea ice itself was moving along with them, and this lasted a few months. They finally were spit out into the northern Weddell Sea, took to the boats, and came to land for the first time in about 500 days on Elephant Island. This is what it looked like in 1916 with Shackleton's party landing there, and they were saved, except they were on this lonely rock in the middle of the Southern Ocean covered by glaciers. No one knew they were there. They were pretty much assumed lost at this point. So they realized they had to rescue themselves. And Shackleton got back in one of those little tiny 22-foot open lifeboats with a couple of other men and cast off from Elephant Island. This is actually them doing that in 1916. And disappeared over the horizon, leaving the rest of his party on the island to just wait and hope that they made it out somewhere and got help and came back and rescued them. So the guys on Elephant Island turned over one of their other little lifeboats they had. This was their shelter. All of these men were living under that overturned lifeboat for the next 4.5 months, until one day, after they'd been sitting there eating penguins this whole time, and Shackleton had made this miraculous 800-mile journey to reach South Georgia Island, which looks like this, landed on one side of it, walked over the top of these peaks, managed to reach a whaling station, and on the 4th try with the 4th different ship, managed to get back to Elephant Island with this Chilean naval vessel. And here he is, that little speck appearing on the horizon. And this is the moment when all of his men on Elephant Island realized that they were saved and they were not going to be lost forever. So this is a pretty incredible story. This is only hitting the highlights. I highly recommend reading this book if you've never read it, called Endurance. It tells the whole long survival tale. Or you can just watch the miniseries with Kenneth Branagh. They got the part down the middle of his hair just perfectly. That was Shackleton's hairstyle for sure. In any case, if you go back to that very spot on Elephant Island these days, the only trace of this ever having happened is this monument, which was of course installed by the Chilean Navy in the 1980s in a fit of nationalism, memorializing not Shackleton, but the Chilean sea captain who piloted the boat that came and rescued them in the end. But if you look around the monument, what else do you see in this picture? Yes, penguins. There are, in fact, many, many penguins on Elephant Island. It may be uninhabited by people, even still now, but it is a penguin metropolis. And wait a minute, how did I suddenly jump into this picture? There I am on Elephant Island with a couple of penguin researchers. Well, among other various adventures in the past 10 years or so, I've been going down to Antarctica, mostly working as a guide on tourism cruise vessels. That's me driving this Zodiac with a very curious humpback whale in one of the bays on the Antarctic Peninsula. I've done a few dozen of these trips at this point, and sometimes they take researchers on board as well. I met some of those researchers. An opportunity came up in 2019 to do a research project with Chinstrap penguins, these very cute, charismatic characters. And so I switched over for a couple of years from tourism back to the research side and went down to do a master's degree that would be based out of Stony Brook University, which may not have the world's best football team, but they have an amazing Antarctic research lab, which is why I ended up going there. So, meet the Chinstrap penguin. This is, I don't even know how to do it. You go out into a Chinstrap penguin colony and they have no fear of people because they have not grown up with land predators. So they just walk up to you and untie your shoelaces and go to sleep right next to you and preen the side of your pants like you're some gorgeous mate, or else they just stand there and stare at you like you're this crazy alien that dropped in from outer space meant to entertain them. They're always up to something. They have an unlimited amount of energy, but they also have a pretty hardcore life. So they nest on Elephant Island every summer between November and February or so. If all goes well, they'll raise 2 chicks like this. You can see the rocks around their nest are very pink colored. That's the color of their guano, because in the Antarctic summer, anyway, they're pretty much 100% of these birds' diet is Antarctic krill, this little shrimp-like creature, which is extremely abundant. In fact, it is possible that the Antarctic krill by biomass is the most abundant animal on Earth. It's kind of a 3-way toss-up between the krill and 2 other species. Can you guess what those 2 others might be? What was that? Ants. I don't know how many ants there are. I don't think there are quite that many. No, the other 2, as far as I'm aware, are humans and domestic cattle. So humans, cows, and krill. What do you know? Anyway, back to penguins. After they're done nesting, these birds have an incredible migration. They obviously can't fly, but they start swimming at the end of the summer, and they swim up to about 4,500 kilometers away from their nesting site out into the Southern Ocean to spend the winter completely at sea before they eventually make their way back to the island the following summer. If all goes well in a chinstrap's life, they can live to be maybe 15 or 20 years old, as far as we know. And their main source of mortality is probably out at sea, because you don't really see that many deceased penguins around the penguin colony in the summer. When we see them at the breeding colonies, they are just totally focused on raising their chicks on this incredible abundant supply of krill. And that krill supports a lot of penguins. So chinstraps go around in these huge, dense breeding colonies, and there are about 30 of these on Elephant Island. But no one had ever really counted them all up very recently. So my research project was essentially going to be to go to Elephant Island and do a penguin survey and just try to see how their populations are doing, because they haven't been very well studied. This came about through a stroke of luck, as far as I'm concerned. Right around the same time that I started graduate school, this report came out. This is called 30 by 30. a bunch of scientists got together and created a blueprint for how we can conserve 30% of the world's oceans by the year 2030. So this was put out by Oxford and York. You can see down there in the lower part. And then there's this other organization mentioned there. Greenpeace was on this report. Wait a minute, Greenpeace. Aren't those crazy environmental activists that like go out and hang from bridges to block shipping lanes and go up to container ships and paint anti-deforestation slogans on the side of them and parachute into soccer games to protest big oil and that kind of stuff? Well, yeah, totally. That's what Greenpeace is. They do these crazy stunts, but in the background, they also support a lot of serious science and conservation. And when that 30 by 30 report came out in 2019, Greenpeace decided to put together one of its biggest scientific expeditions ever. And they called it the Pole to Pole Expedition, taking both of their ships all the way from the Arctic, you can see on this map, and then tracing their way down to Antarctica over the course of a year, taking scientists on board at each one of these stops to do their science. And then they would support the scientists and then use that to create awareness for this 30 by 30 campaign and conserve the world's oceans. But the last stop was going to be Antarctica. So right around the same time I started at Stony Brook, Greenpeace essentially came to our lab and said, so we've got this pole to pole expedition. We have this ship, the Esperanza. Do you want it for like 40 days? In Antarctica, you can do whatever you want, go wherever you want, and do all your penguin studies. And we said, yes, in fact, that would be the perfect way to get to Elephant Island, because no one can ever go there, because generally research in this part of the world is conducted off of cruise ships, which the landings there are so dicey, they don't tend to go there very often. So all of a sudden, I was on this Elephant Island expedition, heading to this mystical island at the end of the world, going across the Drake Passage to look for penguins. I thought it was kind of entertaining, though. I guess I'm somewhat used to cruise ships at this point. So before I got on board the Greenpeace ship, they sent out some literature so we would know what to expect before we got on board. And, you know, it was things like, all the food will be vegetarian and vegan food, no meat on a Greenpeace ship. Also, the accommodations would maybe not be quite as luxurious as I was used to on the cruise ships. We would all be sleeping in bunk beds, and we would have daily chores assigned to us. So I would scrub my share of floors and toilets on this trip, which actually was kind of a nice thing in the end, because it totally got rid of this whole, below decks, above decks system that you often get this feeling of on cruise ships. And then at the end of their document, they just had this little footnote, and they said, because this is a Greenpeace expedition, there may or may not be journalists and celebrities on board with you, observing you do your science. And when I read that, I just started laughing. I was like, oh my gosh, do you think Leo is gonna be there? I mean, ever since he gave that Oscars acceptance speech about climate change, he's been like the climate change celebrity. Leo was not there. He did not show up on our trip, but yeah, you can always dream. What we did get was this crew of hardcore environmental activists who are young and energetic and totally dedicated to going hard all day, every day to support our science, which was awesome because it meant we could do these landings that, again, you don't really get on a cruise ship. And this is what most landings look like on Elephant Island. This is maybe a medium level one. They were pretty wet. That water is just between 0 and 1 degree most of the summer, so fairly cold. But we could get on shore and then do the penguin counts all day long. The reason that this island is interesting scientifically is because there is one existing previous penguin survey from Elephant Island from the year 1970. A bunch of British scientists mounted a special expedition, kind of like this one, and they surveyed all of these penguin colonies. So here's a map of Elephant Island from that 1970 trip, and every one of those red dots is showing where a different penguin colony is. You can see they're scattered around the coastlines of the island, anywhere they can get a grip on rocky beaches. So it meant that we would be able to directly compare our survey against a benchmark that doesn't really exist for a lot of these other places in Antarctica from a half century ago. And then we could get a sense for how the penguins are doing. Have they gone up? Have they gone down? Have they gone sideways since then? We didn't really know what to expect. But how do you count this many penguins? We were expecting to find hundreds of thousands of them on Elephant Island, full of penguins, mostly chinstraps. Well, the simplest way is to just get out there, find a rock so you get a good view of the colony, and count nests. We were interested in how many nests there are in each of these colonies, because those are the ones that are going to make it to the next generation, one by one. So you just make your mental lines in the penguin colony and work your way through them. Do 3 pretty careful counts like that. Make sure you're within about a 5% error of yourself, and then move on to the next one. This has some distinct advantages, counting penguins this way. It doesn't require too much field equipment, literally just a hand counter so you don't lose count, and a field notebook that you can write down all of your data in. And this is exactly how penguin counts have been done for the last 100 years. So it means you can directly compare your counts from today against the ones from that 1970 trip that were counting penguins just like this. But you know, this is 2020, so we had some other technology up our sleeves as well. And we brought down a drone team from Northeastern University. A couple guys came down with us, and that was pretty cool because it allowed you to get this overview of these colonies. This is what a Chinstrap penguin colony on Elephant Island looks like from the air. So what you're seeing is all of those pink blobs are dense areas of nesting penguins that have accumulated their guano around their nests. And then I'm actually there in the middle of this video. You can just barely see me walking slowly there along the edge of that penguin colony. So that's a nice overview, but for the counting purposes, we were more interested in looking at a penguin colony like this, because it gives you a perfect bird's eye view of how the colony is laid out, and you have documentation. So the next person a half century from now doesn't have to just believe you that you saw however many thousand penguins. They can actually go back and look at the images that you took at those colonies as well. It also means you can count large areas of nesting penguins after you get back home on a computer screen. And I ended up doing that for a lot of these large colonies. So you just look at page after page of penguin nest photos like this and put a red dot on every nest. The grayer blobs are the penguin chicks in this image, and the black and white ones are the adults. I think I dotted about 37,000 penguin nests like this in the year after our expedition, but that was pretty useful because it meant that they could then use that data as a training set for an algorithm that could do it automatically. So this is just an example of an output of that algorithm. Every box, it's putting around what it thinks is a penguin nest, and the little numbers, I don't know if you can see, they mostly say 100%, which is its confidence level. So this is working pretty well at this point. And it actually worked incredibly well once we got it calibrated. Here, for instance, is a very high resolution image of an entire small island with penguins nesting all over it. I counted every dot on this image, zooming in by hand, and I counted 6,223 penguin nests. And then we ran the computer algorithm, and in just about a second, and went over what I had taken hours to do and counted 6,203. So that is like incredibly close. We were so excited about that the drone guys wrote a whole scientific paper just about putting this algorithm for counting penguins together and published it. So that was kind of neat because maybe other people can use similar methods in the future to count other types of seabirds. But as for my part, I was mostly doing the site counts. So I was just out there day after day, staring at penguins all day long. It gets to be kind of a Zen activity after a while, staring into penguin eyeballs while they're staring even more intently back at you because they've never seen a human before. Mixed into these penguin colonies were several other species too, which kept things interesting. So besides the chinstraps, we had some gentoo penguins, which have those white earmuffs on the side of their head and an orange like lipstick on their beak. There were a few Adelie penguins as well, which tend to be a more southern species. And then we had a couple of more northern ones too show up. So we had some macaroni penguins, which have to have the best hairstyle of not just any penguin, but probably just about any bird on Earth. And we even had a couple of the bigger ones, the king penguins, show up on sandy beaches, which may even be like an indicator of climate change. Who knows? But it was cool to see them. So we're just out there, you know, doing our drone stuff, doing our site counts, looking at these penguin colonies. Those landings, though, were a bit sketchy sometimes. And so we wanted to keep the back and forth to the ship to a minimum, which ended up meaning that for some of the larger colonies, we set up a camp on land, on the island. So we set up our tents so that we could count penguins right up, you know, until we dropped practically. It doesn't get dark that time of year, unfortunately. And then you sleep in your tent for a few hours and then get up and keep going. And it was interesting camping on this island that, as far as I know, besides Shackleton's 27 men, in history, practically nobody else has ever slept on right up to today. And so the local wildlife was fairly curious. This, I don't know if you can see, there's an elephant seal in the middle of the picture. This is at about midnight. This seal suddenly crawled up and we heard it crunching across the rocks outside and immediately got up and ran out. Because the thing about elephant seals is they are, the scientific word is thigmotactic. It means they're like walruses or something. They like to be in a big huddle of blubber to keep themselves warm on shore. So it saw our tents and was like, oh, there's something to snuggle with. Which we weren't so keen on, snuggling with a several thousand-pound elephant seal. So we had to get out and clap very loud. And it looked kind of confused for a while before it went off to find someone else more amenable to snuggling. But you gotta watch out for these guys. I mean, you leave your equipment sitting on shore for just a couple of hours and come back and they'll be snuggling with it because there's something else soft there to snuggle up to. This particular one was very reluctant to leave our backpacks, and unfortunately it was kind of molting its skin, you can see there. So after it wormed its way off, it just left piles of dead skin and other bodily functions all over our backpacks, and they never have quite smelled the same after that. Greenpeace, in the meantime, had kept their word to bring us a couple of celebrities for our expedition. So while we were camping here in these tents on Elephant Island, we had a couple of people with us who you may or may not have seen before, at least like on TV. The first one was this guy, Gustav. He's a Swedish actor who's been in a couple of TV shows, including one called Vikings on the History Channel. I haven't seen it, so I had no idea who this guy was, but he was super nice. He also has a kind of famous dad, incidentally, Stellan Skarsgård. He was in all kinds of stuff, but most recently that miniseries Chernobyl he was in. And then we also had Marion Cotillard camping out with us. This is a French actress. She actually won the Best Actress Oscar a few years back, and she's been in all kinds of movies as well, including she was in a movie called Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio. So even though Leo couldn't be with us in person, he was, I guess, sort of with us in spirit. And then we had one more celebrity that was supposed to come join us, this Chinese actress named Nini, who I had, again, never heard of, but I guess in China, she's like way more famous than these other two are. Unfortunately, at the last minute, her flights were canceled because I guess there was some like weird virus breaking out in Wuhan, China, where she was flying out from, and they like canceled her travel plans. It was the weirdest thing. First I had heard of this, so that was my introduction to the coronavirus, was that Mimi was a no-no for our trip. Our fieldwork took just about a month, and then it was, a year after that of number crunching. And I will fast forward through that year for your benefit and just give you the quick results, which is that we tallied up our sightings against 1970. And here's what we found. So what you're looking at here is the map on the left is showing all the penguin colonies on Elephant Island. And the size of each dot is scaled by how many birds were in that colony. The red ones are the chinstraps. On the right side, you're seeing the same thing, except from our expedition in 2020, 50 years later. So if you look back and forth, you can see, especially on the south shore of the island, most of those colonies had shrunk dramatically in terms of how many birds were there, by up to like almost 80% in some of the big colonies on the south side. Other parts of the island was a little bit more mixed, but overall, we found that the population of this island had dropped by more than 50% in 50 years, which for a bird that can live, remember, like 20 years long, the generation time, that's not that many generations to see a drop in population like this. So I thought this was very interesting. I wrote up the results and published my first ever scientific paper, which I'm inordinately proud of. So that's why I'm showing it to you on this slide. And I thought, okay, check that off. But it kind of brings up this question, I guess, which is, well, who cares? There's this island that no one has ever practically heard of, and basically no one has ever visited, much less set foot on. Half the penguins have disappeared in the past 50 years there. It's kind of like that, does the tree fall in the forest? Does it make a sound if no one is there to hear it? It's almost a philosophical thing after a while. There's all different kinds of ways you can approach this style of question, ecosystem function and all that kind of thing. But I was just wondering, literally, like, will anybody care? And as it turned out, people did. So this hit the media, and it was picked up by the New York Times, and then it was in National Geographic, and then it just went from there. And eventually, pretty much all the major media outlets covered this study, which I thought was kind of cool, being a graduate student publishing my first scientific paper. Some of them, I have to say, were a little bit more accurate than others. Some of them cherry picked, the very worst single colony and put that in the headline. Some of them read the whole paper and reported it that way. But anyway, it went out over worldwide. And it was just like a week or two later, I got a message that Leonardo DiCaprio had posted a picture of me counting penguins on his Instagram page. So there you go. I guess he was paying attention. Yeah, 1.5 million views, not too bad. Anyway, is this true though? What Leo wrote on his post, he said, climate change is starving Antarctica's most iconic animal. Well, is it climate change? Is that the reason that we saw this drop in the chinstraps at Elephant Island? There's other possible explanations. It could be that there's more whales than there were 50 years ago, so there's more competition for krill. It could be there's more of a krill fishery in that part of the world than there used to be. Kind of hard to disentangle. After reviewing the evidence, I think that climate change probably is playing at least a large role. And I will just show you one slide related to this, which is just this picture of how the temperatures have changed since, this is since 1950. This is just data. I pulled this from the NASA website of the temperature anomaly worldwide. It's a bit funky because this is just showing June through August. So it's different seasons in different hemispheres. But if you just look at the southern hemisphere, so you're comparing apples to apples, there is one spot on this map you can see has warmed up way more than anywhere else. And that is the Antarctic Peninsula, south of South America. That is right where these chinstraps are nesting, right in the middle of that darkest red blob. It's probably making there be less sea ice, and the krill that the chinstraps eat depend on the sea ice for their life cycle. And so there's reasons that that would affect the chinstrap population. So My next stage of my graduate project was to take these ideas and write them up into a larger paper, which was not just looking at Elephant Island, but an assessment of chinstrap populations globally, wherever they live, which is mostly just around that same region. And we found that, yeah, the trends that we saw at Elephant Island probably are happening throughout their range. There's maybe a couple of holdout spots farther east where it hasn't warmed up as much. But that was the second half of my master's project, was to write this global assessment up. And you might say, well, okay, is this even really science? All you're doing is going out and counting penguins. It's not like you're even conducting an experiment with this. Yes, that's true. This is an observational study. It's not experimental. Again, it's kind of hard to disentangle the drivers of what's happening, but it's very useful, practically speaking, because, for instance, there are proposals in place right now to establish marine protected areas all around Antarctica. And this is already starting to happen. This map is showing existing and proposed marine protected areas. And the light blue one at the bottom is the Ross Sea MPA. That was enacted in 2016. It's now the largest marine protected area anywhere in the world. And all the dark blue ones are MPAs that have been proposed, but not quite agreed on yet, because all the members of the Antarctic Treaty have to come to a consensus on it. But they're getting pretty close. And you'll notice that those proposed ones encompass pretty much all of the Antarctic Peninsula, which is where these chinstrap penguins are nesting. That would restrict things like krill fishing in their prime habitat around nesting season and protect them in other ways. So yeah, I hope that with this study, I've made my own small contribution to penguin conservation and, the protection of these ecosystems that we care so much about. In the meantime, I went back to Stony Brook and wrote up my data and papers and all the rest. Those Greenpeace activists got back on board the ship, and without any scientists to make them behave themselves, they got up to some more hijinks while we were away. So when I was there, we found this big piece of trash washed up on a beach. This is it's called a marine fender. It's like a big bumper that you hang between two large vessels at sea so that they can come up close to each other without scraping each other. And it washed up in a penguin colony. You can see there in the background. So I'm in this picture. I'm one of the ones pushing on the left. We managed with our manpower to wrestle this huge car-sized fender off the beach, towed it with our Zodiac back to the ship, craned it back on board, and strapped it down on our deck so we could take it back to civilization. And then, as far as I was concerned, I left it there. But then I later looked at the Greenpeace Facebook page for the Esperanza ship, and they decided they were going to paint a nice little slogan on the side of this fender that we'd found. And then they went off and they found a transshipping vessel in the Southern Ocean nearby, and they towed the fender out to it with this nice little message painted on the side right up so that they could display it and return this trash to its rightful owner. You can see the fishermen up on board looking down like, what the heck is going on? And then they didn't stop there. They actually boarded the vessel just like pirate style with a rope ladder, got up on board and got right up in the face of these fishermen who had no idea what was happening. This is all because transshipping is its own environmental problem in Antarctica. It's basically a way that you can launder illegally caught fish into the legitimate worldwide fisheries system by transferring it from one ship to another and mixing it with other fish, and then you ship it back to whatever port you want to sell it in. So Greenpeace is all over that. And I gotta say, I like their style. I like what they're doing down there. And then they finished their campaign by projecting these nice, peaceful images onto the sides of icebergs. And that was it for the pole-to-pole expedition. So these days, I myself am a happy penguin. I graduated in May with my master's degree. So I am now a Master of Science and a penguinologist. And of course, the chinstraps are still down there doing what they do right now. Let's see, it's September. So right this very instant, they are coming back from their long winter swim and finding their way back to Elephant Island, where they'll land next month to set up their nesting territories, hopefully find the same mate that they had last year. If not, then they'll get another one. It's not like completely monogamous out there. And then we'll have a whole new nesting season ahead of us. So on that note, thank you so much for having me here and for watching online too.
Yeah, I unmute when I clap.
So yes, I am told I can take questions live and from Zoom at the same time. So I'll start with the live one out here. Yes. Yes, very good. So the question is, we have seen an explosion in population in Antarctica, especially of Antarctic fur seals. And what does that tie into all this population increases and declines? That probably is part of it. So it's not just the seals, but the whales as well. Whales and seals were basically annihilated in this part of Antarctica 100+ years ago. Whaling even went on to the mid-1900s before it was banned in the 70s and 80s. And their populations have recovered actually pretty dramatically. So humpback whales have been increasing about, what, 4% a year in Antarctica. They're almost back to their pre-whaling levels as far as we can tell. Antarctic fur seals, same thing has happened. They were even thought to be extinct in some of these breeding colonies, and then a few came back and then a few more. And now if you go to like South Georgia, you literally can't step on the beach during breeding season because it's covered with fur seals. Fur seals and whales eat krill just like penguins do. So with all these seals and whales coming back, the idea is maybe they're eating more of the krill supply and there's less left over for the penguins, which may be partly explaining why the penguin populations are going down. There's other theories though. I like the one called the whale poo hypothesis, which is that whales, when they have to go to the bathroom, always do it at the surface because of the way that pressure works. So what they do is they swim down, they eat all this krill, and then they come back up to the surface and they poop it out. And then all those nutrients are recycled immediately back into the marine system and turned into more krill. So it's not, you can't just add these things up. And it's possible that this whole krill surplus never really happened because whales are just fertilizing the ocean as they eat the krill, if that makes sense. So again, it's hard to disentangle these things. The other main thing was the krill fishery. As of now, that seems to be very sustainable in Antarctica. They're not taking that many krill for several reasons. It's hard to harvest and you need pretty good technology to do it. If that increases, and especially if it's concentrated around local penguin nesting colonies, that's probably more of an issue. But yeah, climate change, whale recovery, seal recovery, krill fishing, all these things are happening at the same time. Other questions? Yeah, I'll take one up here.
I was just wondering how population trends, but do leopard seals?
Yeah, good question. Do leopard seals prey on chinstrap penguins? Yes, the answer is definitely yes. Leopard seals are like the polar bears of the South. There are no polar bears in the Southern Hemisphere, just to be clear, but there are leopard seals in Antarctica, and in the water, they are voracious predators, and they will eat penguins around their nesting colonies. So they wait just offshore for the birds that are wading in and out and are in that awkward stage of just before they swim and take off like a torpedo, the leopard seal can come up and grab one. They probably don't make much of a dent population-wise because there's so many penguins, but you do see it happening. especially at the end of the season when the young penguins are going into the water for the first time. I mean, it can feel like the leopard seals are just lining up right off the beach at that point. So the end of the summer gets a little hectic. But again, I don't think that's making much of a dent in the overall population. But yeah, leopard seals are crazy predators. Okay, yeah, let's, Debbie's gonna read out one from the Zoom here.
So, do chinstraps ever breed on other islands?
Ah, yeah, do chinstraps ever breed on other islands? So besides Elephant Island, their range is locally in that same region. So there are other islands scattered around the Antarctic Peninsula, and the chinstraps will nest on quite a few of them, but they don't really go to other regions of Antarctica. So they, of all these penguin species I mentioned earlier, are the ones that are most restricted to this zone. The king penguins and the macaroni penguins are found farther north, as well as the gentoos. The adelies and the emperors are found farther south. The chinstraps mostly are just right around the peninsula and a couple of big islands to the east. There are some islands down there called the South Orkneys and some called the South Sandwich Islands that are even more remote than Elephant Island is. In fact, it's an active volcano and it erupted several years ago onto one of the largest chinstrap penguin colonies, and we still have no idea how they're doing after that eruption. So there's even another factor that may be affecting their overall population. But yeah, they're scattered all around the Antarctic Peninsula. Another one from Zoom.
Yeah, I'm gonna see you. Are there plans for the next chinstrap census?
Are there plans for the next chinstrap penguin census? Well, hopefully it won't be another 50 years before somebody gets back to Elephant Island to resurvey it. But these opportunities don't come up that often to get to the really remote colonies. The main way that penguins are surveyed in the greater Antarctic Peninsula region is from cruise ships, actually. As I mentioned earlier, they will take researchers on board, and then while the tourists are out seeing and photographing on their landings, the researchers get off and madly dash around for a couple of hours to whatever penguin colonies are nearby and survey those and come back. And that is actually a really good way to get rapid counts of a broad area, and it would just be totally impractical to try to put together these kinds of scientific expeditions to go to all those different colonies every year, just like the cruise ships do. So that is the main way that penguin colonies are surveyed. And we actually have really good data from a lot of the more visited colonies down there. One more live up here, sure.
Is that survey method from the cruise ships, is that hand counting, or do you think drone counting will be like more common? Because I think drone counting is faster because you build a number crunching later.
Yeah, the question is, do you do hand counts or drone counts from a cruise ship? And it just varies. So it actually is faster to count a colony by hand if it's less than about 2,000 nests, because with the drone, you got to get out there, get yourself situated, unpack it, fly it up in the air, let it do its grid, land it, put it back in the box. And by the time you've done all that, you could just go and count the penguins that are standing there right in front of you. But once you get above about 2,000 penguins, then it takes longer to count them than you can do during a typical cruise landing. So that's where the drones are going to be really useful going forward, because then we'll be able to start getting some counts for these bigger colonies that historically we just haven't been able to count quickly enough to do them from the cruise ships. Maybe another Zoom question?
Yeah, Beth from Plymouth County says hello and congratulations and asks, what project would you like to get started now that you're finished with your master's?
Oh, yes. Which project would I like to start now that I'm finished with my master's? Well, on to more adventures. I'm still doing writing projects. I've actually just finished a new book called Birding Basics. So it's an introduction to birding for people who are just getting started. That'll be published by National Geographic next year. It looks like in November 2022. So you can give that to all your friends who are just getting started in birding for Christmas next year. And in the meantime, I'm scheduled to go back to Antarctica this November, December, January for a couple more of the cruise expeditions, get back to the more luxurious lifestyle for a season. And then we'll just see where it goes from there. You know, this kind of stuff is planned season by season. So we'll see what other opportunities come up after that. Up here, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So with the Chinstrap penguins, I was wondering, like, how you know that their population was gone down, because I was wondering, you know, another explanation could be that they just migrated to somewhere else in Antarctica, for example. Say if the island is getting warmer, you would think that maybe they would have migrated closer. That be another possible explanation.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you know that the population's gone down on Elephant Island? Couldn't the penguins have just migrated away from the island, maybe farther south if it's warming up? As far as we know, chinstraps are extremely faithful to their breeding colony, and they come back there every year. So if they hatch somewhere as a chick, it's like more than 95% of them will come back to that same colony on the same island to nest for the first time as an adult. And then once they've nested there, they come back faithfully to that same spot year after year. We have enough long-term tracking studies of chinstraps and other penguin species in this area that we have found that to be true. I think that leaves some wiggle room for the adaptability of chinstrap penguins. There is a possibility that we've only seen them be very faithful because conditions have been stable while we've been studying them. And then now that things are changing, maybe they'll start moving around more, but we haven't been able to document that happening. So I think it's probably the case that this is just a decline in that breeding colony instead of some kind of immigration happening.
Another migration question. How far and where do they spend their winters away from nesting areas?
Oh yeah, how far and where do they spend their winters away from the nesting areas? The chinstraps just have this incredible migration, and that only has been understood again pretty recently because the technology, sort of driven by cell phones and microchips and other devices, has gotten to the point where we have tags now that we can put on a penguin over the course of a winter, and it will beam its coordinates back and forth to satellites, and so we can see where it goes. That didn't used to be possible until just the last decade or so, and it really has shown us that they travel incredible distances. They really make their home in the ocean. For us, we think of penguins as being on land, but of course they're so awkward on land because they're adapted to live in the sea. So it's not so weird for them to spend months at a time in the water, and they really do. They swim up to like 4,500 kilometers from their nesting site on this winter migration that just kind of wraps around the continent of Antarctica just off the edge of the sea ice zone, and then they come back the following spring. Was there another question up here? Yeah.
Sorry, I might have zoned out a little bit earlier, but I don't know if you mentioned why you guys study specifically on the chinstrap.
Ah, yeah, good question. Why do we study specifically the chinstrap when there's all these other penguins down there? Well, there's two reasons that I wanted to study the chinstrap. The first one is that the other species I mentioned have been way more well studied up to this point. The adelies, the gentoos, even the emperors and the kings and the macaronis just live in more accessible places than Elephant Island. And so people have a better handle on how they're doing. And the chinstraps were like this missing gap. So just to fill in these literal gaps in data sets, it was important to go to Elephant Island and look at the chinstraps in particular. But they are also the most abundant penguin, at least on the Antarctic Peninsula and possibly in all of Antarctica. Even though these other penguins get the headlines, the adelies and the emperors, you know, the March of the Penguins and Happy Feet, those are all about those other species, but the chinstraps are there in huge numbers. And so ecologically speaking, they're having a huge impact on, you know, the whole food web down there. And so again, it's just important to understand how they're doing. Officially, they're listed as being of least concern. by the IUCN, which has these different categories of how endangered a species is. Least concern is as good as it gets. But with these recent studies indicating some population declines, I think that probably is going to be revisited in the near future, and they may bump that designation down in the not too distant future if these trends continue. Was there another Zoom one? 3 more. Okay, we'll do them real quick.
I think someone's looking for luxury. What cruise line do you work for?
Which cruise line do I work for? Well, this season I'll be going down with Quark Expeditions on actually a brand new ship that they have just built called the Ultramarine. It's got a couple of helicopters on board, and I'm told it's very nice. And so if you're thinking of taking an Antarctic trip this season or maybe next year, then yeah, come look me up.
Given the recent challenges for the cruise companies, do you think that they will be as amenable to having scientists along from a financial perspective?
Yeah, the recent challenges in the cruise business, how are they going to keep it up with the researchers? Well, I'm not going to go into all the financial details, but I know that at least some of the cruise companies are very stable and they're actually doing quite well, even though they've canceled now 2 years worth of trips, both to Antarctica and the Arctic in the other part of the year. So, you know, fingers crossed it all works out. I'm told they're still planning to take on researchers in the future. So those are all pretty solid commitments as far as I know. Okay, we'll do one more, last question.
You know, why the temperatures increasing so much around the peninsula?
Yeah, why is the temperature increasing so much just locally in that one spot around the Antarctic Peninsula? That is a tough question for me to answer because I am not a climate scientist. I am a penguinologist. So I believe whatever they tell me. But I think it has to do with the complicated systems of ocean currents and the way that these wrap around Antarctica. It is the only continent that is completely surrounded by an ocean. And that means that the winds and the ocean currents blow west to east around the outside of Antarctica. They just go around and around. And then the Antarctic Peninsula sticks up into that current. And so it gets deflected in weird ways and just interesting things happen in that part of the world. And I assume that is part of the reason that it's warmed up more than other places. Thank you all for coming. I have a few books up here if you're interested. And yeah, thank you very much.